Hello, Pamela. Welcome to Write with Impact.
Hello, I am so glad to be here.
That's great. I think I was checking, I think the last time we spoke was several years ago on this podcast. And so it's been a while, but we've been in touch ever since.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and a lot has happened. I that was, there was a pandemic in between you and I talking, but yeah, a lot's happened.
Yeah. So before we get started, I want to talk to you about a lot of things. I know you could talk about a lot of things. One thing I would like to focus on is writing books. I know you are the author of two best-selling books on content marketing and content strategy. Excellent books, by the way, which I've written about in the past. And I know you also help people build successful online businesses through your Offer Accelerator program. You were the founder of Big Brand System. Why don't you? I'd rather hear it from you rather than me trying to go through this long-winded, boring intro. Tell me, what do you do? What are you focusing on now? And then we can dive into some of the questions I have of you.
The interesting thing about what I'm doing right now is I do help people to build profitable online businesses, but I help a very specific group of people. I help people who are in mid-career.
Hmm.
So people who look a lot like you and I do, who have a lot of expertise, have a lot to bring to the table, and maybe don't completely understand how to use all the levers and the gears of the online space to get that expertise out to the people who will pay them for it. And the other thing I'm super passionate about with the group of people who I help is I'm very passionate about them getting paid well for their expertise. I think in the online space, you see a lot of people saying, "Oh, yes, create a $17, lead magnet and then sell something that's $99 and, moving up from there." And I don't think that's the right advice for people in our age group with our level of expertise. I think we should be charging a premium for it, and we should be finding people who are willing to pay for it. So part of what I'm doing in the Offer Accelerator is helping people to get to that point that they feel comfortable charging a premium for the expertise that they're sharing. I have it's called my premium pricing guide, and it just kind of walks people through like, okay, get comfortable with that bigger number because that's what you need to be charging. And then helping them to find people who will recognize the value in what they're offering and be willing to pay for it. It's not easy, but it's doable. And I really enjoy the challenge. I enjoy working with people in our age group who are ready to go out there and make a big difference with their expertise.
Now that's great. That's very interesting. And I can see the potential for the number of people who would be interested in your offer and working with you would be quite potentially quite large.
It's interesting, and I actually have an application to the program because I'm trying to gather a group of people who are kind of operating at a similar level. And I do need people to already have gathered an audience. So I can't work with people who are just starting out, who have like 0 subscribers on their email list, or they have no connections on social media. They have to have people to make an offer to if I'm going to help them to create an offer. So that's one of the things I'm looking for in the application. I actually say no to about 50% of the applications that come in. So there are just certain things I'm looking for, and the people I have gathered into the program now are amazing. So I'm happy to have that application. It's working as it should. So
That's great. I mean, just what would be sort of the two or three top, the kind of your among your clients or the people that work through with you through your Offer Accelerator program? What kind of offers do they typically have? Are they typically coaches? Are they consultants? Or do they have products and services?
there's actually nothing typical. And to me, that's part of the fun. I have had both a service-based business and a product-based business, so I can help people on both ends of the spectrum. So I have people who offer services. I have people who offer products. I have people who offer a combination. Some are coaches, yes. Some are teachers, some are web developers, copywriters. I mean, there's a little bit of everything. And I really enjoy that challenge of helping people who are creating all sorts of offers. And what I've noticed is the principles are similar. The technique for actually marketing those things is slightly different, but I'm able to help everyone.
That's great. I think one thing I would like to ask you about today, I know I can probably chew your ear off and ask you a million questions about what you do for the next couple of hours, but let's say we have 45 minutes or so where I can ask you a couple of focused questions. One thing I am interested in is writing books. And I think where I'd like to just start is from the very top, from a strategic level. I understand, you probably help your clients craft, their overall strategy. Why write a book? So I think that's to start at that existential marketing question. Why write a book? How does that help? And then after that, then I'd love to sort of, if you don't mind, pick your brain on how to write a book and publish it.
Absolutely. I'd love to talk about that topic. And this is probably not going to be the answer you expect, but you ask that question, most people say, oh, it's like a business card, it opens doors and all of that. Honestly, what I have found is a book project is a long project. You have to be devoted to getting it done and taking it from start to finish and getting all the way through the messy middle part where you're just like ready to throw in the towel and where things get hard. You have to navigate through that whole thing. And then once you finally have it written and it's in the process of being produced, you have to figure out how to market it. So it feels kind of like it never ends, And honestly, I think the biggest thing a book does for you is it gives you the confidence of knowing that you can get through a project of that magnitude. Basically managing it yourself. If you're self-publishing, you're managing it yourself. If you're working with a publishing company, it's a slightly different thing. But and then I think there's a little bit of like respect that you get from other people that you navigated yourself through a book project,
Mm.
So yes, it is a business card and it opens doors and everything, but I think there's a little bit of like, oh wow, you did that from start to finish. You got yourself through that. And it is impressive. Anyone who manages to get through a project like that and all of the like weird ego trash that you have to work through, like, am I, should I really be an author? Am I good enough to be putting these words on paper? And,
Mhm.
do I deserve to have a book? And do I deserve to be selling my expertise inside these hard covers and, all of that? Like you have to kind of work through all that stuff.
Mhm.
And it's admirable when people have done all that work.
That's great. And you've done it twice, as far as I know, at least. I mean, at least it's very obvious. I remember reading Master Content Marketing, and then you also follow that up with Master Content Strategy. So obviously they're linked, both visually, the cover design, you can see they're similar, but the topics are obviously linked together. I would love if you could just take us into the, back in time and into your studio, your writing studio or project management studio. It sounds like a lot of it was project management, the way you
Mhm.
describe it. If you could just share how you planned and wrote the books, how you edited them, and then also a little bit about the publishing process and then eventually marketing process. And that's probably enough for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to either talk very fast or be super concise and superficial in your answers. I'm just
I'm gonna
joking.
find a happy medium between this. So, one thing, you and I know each other pretty well, but I don't know if you know this about me. So I am really into systems and processes, and have been through my entire career. Really, I've owned my own business since 1992. So it's going on 30 years. So systems and processes are how I've made myself successful, basically. So I kind of took that tendency and applied it to the book creation process. So what I ended up doing is first I researched to see a typical nonfiction book, how many words does that have? So what I discovered in my research was it was like between 45 and 50,000 words. Now, there are a lot of people who write books that are way longer, but I don't know about you, but I so appreciate it when a book is like concise. It communicates what you came to the book to find out, and it gets out of there and finishes up. So I was like, I know I could write more, but I'd rather write on the shorter side and see if I can communicate it in fewer words. Plus, I was working for Copy Blogger at that time, and had like a 55-hour-a-week job. I mean, I had a really heavy work schedule. So I kind of felt like I need to write this book with a word count that I know I can hit. So I took the word count, and coincidentally, just before I started writing my book, I read a book called The 12-Week Year. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, it's not really a well-written book, to tell you the truth. It's not a book that you read because it's so well written, but the concept is amazing. What they basically say is, instead of spreading a big project out over an entire year, treat 12 weeks as if they were 12 months and aim to get as much done every week as you would get done on a project in a month. And the way you do that is you dedicate time and you break the project down. You sit down and break the project down into 12 pieces that you can manage. So that's what I did. I basically gave myself a word count for getting the book written. It's like, if I'm going to write, 45 to 50,000 words, how many words do I need to write every week? And then I created 2 blocks of time. So I woke up early on Tuesdays and I blocked out all Saturday morning. And I basically told my family, look, for the next 12 weeks, I can't do anything on Saturday mornings. I'm going to be waking up early on Tuesdays. So everybody knew. And I just blocked the time out. I use Scrivener. And Scrivener allows you to plug in your word goals. So you kind of write away and it shows you that you're getting closer and closer. So you have like this visual feedback on how you're doing. And I wrote it in Scrivener and got the entire first draft done in 12 weeks doing it that way.
Remarkable. That's very remarkable. Please continue. So, and then once you finished your draft, then what?
Well, I was going to say, so as you know, the first draft is probably the most difficult part, but it's really only the beginning, because even though you self-publish, you do have to go through an editor. If you want your book to be respected and to really serve as a good resource, it needs to be thoroughly edited. So it's got to go through the editing process. And that's a lot of, frankly, painful back and forth. You're going back and forth, sending them drafts, getting feedback, rewriting, and you're kind of sick of it at that point, right? Like, you've been looking at it for such a long time, but you get through that part, and then you're working on, creating what the look of the pages is going to be. The interesting thing is, one of the reasons I self-published, and the first book was published in 2016, so this was, it was a while ago now. But one of the reasons I felt comfortable self-publishing is that my original business was as a publication designer. So I was like, well, the writing part is actually the part that I'm less familiar with, but designing the pages, I can definitely do that. I am not concerned about that. So I designed all my pages. I designed my covers. Like I designed the spine and the back cover, like all that. I kind of speak that print language, and I have been for a long time. So I did that work myself. But nowadays there are tools that will allow you to do it yourself. There's Vellum. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Vellum. So the most recent versions of my books were actually designed in Vellum. It's the only problem with it is it's Mac only. The other piece of software that you can explore, though, if you're on a Windows computer, is there's a piece of software called Atticus. I think it's Atticus. And that's a piece of software that was created by a colleague of mine here in Nashville. And it's pretty amazing. It's actually on the web. So it's this software that allows you to put your book together, put the pages together, and create print versions, Kindle, iPad, like every electronic version and print on the web. So it's cross-platform compatible. You can use it on a Windows machine or on a Mac. So there are some capabilities that are available to us now that, and you know, they're kind of, I don't want to say dummy proof, but that's kind of what they are. They're set up so that they have pre-designed styles. And all you have to do is feed in your Word document and make sure that the pages divide up the way they are supposed to. So there are some capabilities that are built in now that we can use as self-published authors that give us an incredible amount of power. And then the other option, if you know somebody watching is interested in doing this and doesn't feel comfortable putting together the pages themselves, is there are people, I have a friend here, Becky Bain here in Nashville also, who basically she helps you to self-publish, but she's there doing the page design and the cover design, and she has a publication background. So it ends up being kind of a hybrid approach because you have somebody who's helping you with the part that you might be not be comfortable with, and she does the part, she takes care of all that, and you can just kind of focus on the writing. So that's another option. I mean, there are so many more options than there used to be.
That's great. No, it sounds like you literally did most of the work yourself, which is fantastic. And I know there are, and I've spoken to book writing and publishing coaches on this program. And but some of the tools, the applications that you mentioned, thank you for introducing them, because I had never heard of them, to be honest. And hopefully that will be helpful to some of our listeners. I think I have a couple of questions that came to mind. I hope you don't mind if I probe a little bit.
Not at
One
all.
would be, you mentioned you had worked for Copyblogger for a short while. And my understanding, I remember when I spoke to you, I think you were still with Copyblogger. And my understanding is that it was at one point sort of the content marketing blog in the world. It was like, it had the best SEO, not just the best SEO, sorry, the best content, and therefore the best SEO and a lot of traffic. Is that correct?
Yes,
Right.
they have been really an industry leader. And I'm still writing for them. I have a post actually that went live today as we
Oh,
speak.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So they still get a tremendous amount of traffic. They have an incredible library of content available on the site. So it is a fantastic resource. They are primarily helping writers. So people who are positioning themselves as copywriters, for example, that's their focus right now, from what I
Right.
understand.
Right. That's great. I guess my question was, how did you go from being, I believe it sounds like you were you were a blogger, but you also, it sounds like you managed a team of other writers. I'm less interested in the management aspect because that's sort of a pain in the neck. Sorry. I'm just joking. It's actually, I think what I'm interested in is, how did you go from writing short pieces, because essentially they're maybe 600, 700, 800 words, I don't know, 1,000 words or more. How did you go from writing blog posts to writing a book, and what's the difference in terms of the process and how you just approach the whole thing? Because it sounds like you're very clear, you carved out very specific blocks of time during the week, shut the door, hopefully you've locked it, and
Yeah,
told your
yeah,
family to stay away from me for these two blocks of time. What did
right.
you do? What did you do differently in terms of process to write your first book and eventually your second book versus writing a blog post?
Right. The big difference, every once in a while, you probably heard this too. Every once in a while, I'll hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm going to write a book. I'm just going to take a bunch of my blog posts and put them
Right.
together in a book." And I'm like, "Oh, that is not going to work," because, just the way I teach content marketing, the books that I wrote are about content marketing. So the same way I teach content marketing, which is go into that piece of content knowing what you want to say and building I call it the content backbone. So building some kind of structure that your words can hang on. And that is, it's basically your headline, your subheads. You work through what argument you're going to develop in your piece of content, your overarching message and all of that. That's like a microcosm for what we're trying to do in a book, which is to take people through this arc that starts at the beginning of the book, goes all the way through the middle and all the way to the end. You want to have that kind of mapped out ahead of time so that when you sit down and write, you know which part of that journey you're actually writing to. And that helps to just keep the entire book on track, because that is one of the big challenges. If you're used to writing, my posts were never 700 words long. I actually recommend that people aim for 1,200 to 1,500 words as a minimum nowadays, but that's not that many words, right? So it's not that difficult to keep yourself on track from beginning to end within that number of words. But then when you're talking about 45 or 50,000 words, that's where an editor can be very helpful, because your editor will say, you said this at the beginning and this at the end, and they don't really match up, So it can be so helpful to have it sort of mapped out ahead of time. And a tool like Scrivener can be really helpful for that, because it just gives you tools to be able to sort of think through how you're going to develop your information and take the reader through this journey that starts from chapter 1 and ends in the appendix, basically.
Right. That's great. That's very helpful. And you've mentioned several times working with an editor, which I highly, support and agree with. But I also understand that there are different types of editors. It sounds like, and I'd rather hear from you, what kind of editor did you work with? Was it a developmental editor and then later a copy editor and or proofreader? I mean, what's the terminology that you use?
I didn't work with a developmental editor. I suppose I could have, but I just didn't. I felt strongly that I knew sort of how I wanted to put the pieces together. Plus, I did this podcast. I mentioned it to you, Zero to Book, with
I
Jeff
remember that.
Goins. Yeah.
I remember that. That was
yeah,
fantastic.
It was a great experience. And honestly, I think I was able to talk through so many things with Jeff that he may have been my developmental editor, actually, but we did it in podcast form so that lots of people could benefit from it. So
I love Jeff. I've interviewed him a couple of times on this podcast, and I know he's got a very large and loyal following. So just a little plug for Jeff Goins.
He's amazing.
Yeah,
Yes, he is amazing. And that podcast was such a great experience. So I was able to kind of think through what I wanted to say in that first book, especially doing that podcast with Jeff. Then after that, the editor that I worked with was kind of like a line editor, and then she had somebody on her team that did proofreading as well. So I had both of those.
What's the difference? Tell us. I mean, I'm sort of trying to pick this apart. I think I understand the difference because first of all, I've been writing for a while, and I'm also an editor, a professional editor, but I also know that there are many different types of editors, and I tend to sort of run the gamut. I actually do almost every single phase of editing myself. But to tell us, what's the difference between what you just said?
It's interesting that you're asking that, because it was news to me that there was different kinds of editing for books. I had no idea. I mean, it was like part of writing the book was just, I wanted to know how to write a book. I wanted to know, it's something that I could see myself doing in retirement, writing books. So I just wanted to know how the whole process worked. So this idea that there was an editor for this thing and an editor for that thing, and then a proofreader on top of it, that was all news. So the way it was explained to me is that a line editor is somebody who is looking at the content, and a proofreader is looking at the grammar and the spelling. Does that jive with how you understand it?
It does. But then you still said that you did not work with a developmental editor, which to me, the way you just define. So I'm being kind of nitpicky, but the way you define, chance
you know a lot better than I do.
The way you defined line editor just now sounds similar to a developmental editor, but it sounds like there still is a difference between a line editor and a developmental editor. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pick this apart. I'm doing this honestly, partly for selfish reasons, but also because I think it's useful for people to understand the difference.
I think it's the kind of thing you should probably talk to your potential editor about. It's been like 5 years since I had to define that. So that's how I understood it, was that the line editor was kind of going through the book line by line, checking content and making sure everything worked. And it happened after the draft. And I guess I understood the developmental editor as being somebody who helped you more toward the beginning of the process, but might have it wrong. And then the proofreader obviously is looking at things toward the end just to make sure spelling and grammar and everything are all aligned.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll let you go on that one. I mean, that's a good answer, and let's move on to another topic. So we've talked about writing and editing. I didn't really get a chance to sort of pause and ask you about your writing process. It sounds quite mysterious. The way you described it, you blocked off time. It sounds like you're you're very organized, and disciplined, which is all good. But then once you close the door and you're in your little writing studio, you open up your laptop. I guess you use Scrivener. Okay, I get that. Tell us a little bit about the process. How do you focus? And how do you, pull together ideas? Just tell us a little bit more at that point, when you're actually writing your book, the first draft of a chapter, say.
Right. The most important thing that I did is what I did before I would sit down to write, which was besides drink a cup of coffee, right? You have to
That
fully
helps.
caffeinate, right?
That helps.
However, I always had an idea of the piece of the book that I needed to write. And what would happen with me is that I would know, I had these 2 blocks of time in my week when I was going to be writing. But during the rest of the week, when I wasn't writing, when I was taking a walk or washing dishes or doing laundry or cooking dinner or like whatever, doing any, everyday task, I was thinking about the fact that I was going to need to write a chapter about XYZ. And that kind of primed my brain to be open to ideas or ways of thinking about it, or analogies that I could use, or stories I could tell. So by the time I actually sat down to write, I had some ideas. I had already in some cases I would jot them down and, just like on a note on my phone or something. And then when I would sit down, I would just flesh out what I was already thinking. So that was a huge help, just doing that kind of pre-thinking before I sat down to write. And then after that, it was purely like on Tuesday mornings, I woke up early. I think I wrote for maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And then I had to start work, I had to start my job. So it was deadline. That was the big motivator, was just the deadline that I wanted to. And then Saturday morning, it was the same thing. I didn't want to spend all day Saturday writing. So I would try to get the writing start. I would try to start it and finish it so that I could enjoy the rest of my weekend. I'm a very deadline oriented person. Having a business all these years makes you very deadline oriented.
No, that's great. I know exactly what you're talking about. That definitely helps. There are a lot of things that motivate people, and the deadlines are not just the deadlines in and of themselves. There's a reason why there's a deadline, because you have to deliver an end product to somebody, whether it could be yourself if you run your own business like yourself, or to somebody else that you're working with or for. And deadlines definitely are absolutely critical. Completely understand that. How did you wrote 2 books about content. One was called Master Content Marketing. The other one was Master Content Strategy. How did you decide to follow? Because I talked to you about content marketing years ago, right after you just published it. It just come out. What made you decide to write the follow-up book? I call it a follow-up book. It's obviously related. Content strategy. Why didn't you start off with the strategy first and then the marketing? Because I thought that's how you should do things.
Just to give people context, my career has been up until 2010. I was working as a graphic designer. So I was in charge of the visual appearance of everything that I created, and I had nothing to do with the words. If the project I was working on needed words written, we hired a writer. I thought of myself as, well, I'm not a words person. I make it look good. That's my department, In 2010, I decided to start my online business and decided I needed to add a blog and attract an audience with writing. And I just had to figure out how to write, you know? So I developed this process for getting things written, and my writing, I became so confident about my writing that I started pitching Copyblogger, which was the industry leader at that time in content marketing. And they started publishing my posts on Copyblogger. And after about the third month, they asked if I would write for them every month. And this felt like I was being asked to give a concert on the stages of Carnegie Hall once a month. I mean, it was just like I had hit the big time, you know? So I developed this process that managed to fool the people at Copyblogger into thinking I could write somehow. And I started feeling like, you know, one of the things you do as a designer is you're very aware of patterns. And I sort of felt like I had cracked the code of the pattern of a good piece of content, like the pattern that you have to take people through and the component parts that you have to develop to make that piece of content easy to read, easy to skim, to develop your argument, to make the headline something that people want to click on and read, like all of that. I had sort of figured that out. So I almost felt this weird obligation that anyone else who was in my shoes and felt like they were not a born writer, they didn't major in English, they weren't in marketing communications, like, but they needed to use writing somehow. I felt like I needed to share that process. So the first book, Master Content Marketing, was all about sharing those component parts and then sharing my 4-day content creation system, which I'm sure I talked about if you and I when you and I talked the first time, I'm sure we shared about that. But it's basically a way to get your content produced where you break down the process over several days rather than trying to sit down and create a piece of content in one marathon session, which is not a good idea. So the first book was about that. And then the second book, you know, I wrote the first book and I got, you know, this great feedback that it had really helped people who didn't feel confident as writers. Now they felt confident, they knew what to do. The second book was in response to people saying like, okay, I know how to create the content, but like, how often should I publish and what should I publish? And if I have to promote something, how do I use my content to promote something? And how do I build engagement with my content? How do I repurpose my content? It was like once you had a factory that could churn out really high quality content, what did you do with it? Like how could you make it work for your business? So master content strategy is about helping people be strategic about the content marketing that they now should know how to write and how to create because they've read Master Content Marketing. That's the idea.
That's a great story. I remember very clearly that you were a designer, a graphic artist, a book designer, but I didn't really know that you know, had started off purely as that and that you made that transition into writing. I think that's a very inspiring story. I think that's great. And you've had a tremendous success to the point where people would never guess unless you told them, like you just told me, that you know, you didn't start off as a writer. And I think that's very encouraging because, you know, I see a lot, I talk to people I know, even family members and friends, and they all say, oh, I would love to blog. I would like to write. I want to write a book. I want to write this. I want to do that. And a lot of people don't. A lot of
Yeah.
people actually don't start. And so one thing that I try to do, I try to help people start and keep going. And I get a lot of joy out of that, out of seeing people do that. And also some people really break through and succeed very nicely. And it sounds like you help a lot of people do that as well.
I love it. And honestly, I mean, you know this, the only way to really get good at writing is to write a lot, right? And the beautiful thing about blogging and social media, when you write really rich content on social media, it has the same effect. The beautiful thing about it and just doing it repetitively is the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. It's like learning to speak a language. You just keep speaking it until you feel fluent. And that's how writing has become for me. I'm a very confident writer now, but I was not 10 years ago.
Right. If you were to say, talk to the folks out there who are just starting out or wanting to start, what would be, and I know you document a lot of this in your 2 excellent books. I'm not expecting you to give me a complete, précis or summary of both of them, but I'm going to say one more thing to preface my question is it's getting harder. It's getting harder to break through, I believe. However, a lot of these platforms, most of the platforms are getting bigger. What does that mean? There's the audiences have grown dramatically. I mean, since the last time we spoke, it was several years ago. LinkedIn has grown dramatically. It's getting harder to stand out on LinkedIn. Nonetheless, if you look at just the sheer numbers of members, which I think exceeds, at when we're talking now, over 750 million, maybe not all of them are active, but there's LinkedIn, there's Medium, and now there's Substack, which I'm now on Substack, and that is taking off. It's booming. And then, of course, you can and should have your own WordPress blog, and I highly recommend WordPress. It doesn't have to be WordPress, of course. It could be other platforms, as you know. There's so much to choose from, so much to think about, so much to worry about. Where the heck should somebody start? How should they get started?
I'm going to say something that's going to sound really strange, but I actually don't think the platform matters that much. I think you need to own one of the platforms that you write on. So that should be your own website, or it should be your email list that you write to. I think you need to own one of them. And the reason for that is that if for some reason the platform that you are posting on suddenly goes away or gets a terrible reputation or becomes unpopular or is not sustainable, all of your writing will disappear, right? So you have to own at least one of the platforms. But I do think you need to have a second one that is one of, it could be LinkedIn or Facebook or Medium or one of these other platforms where you're just freely sharing content. And oftentimes those function as a stream. So you post something, it moves down the stream of content. The next week you post something else, it moves down the stream, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but you wouldn't want that to be the only place that you write for. I think it's important to have some content that you have complete control over. I might be a little bit of a control freak, but I just, you see these platforms, they have their popularity peaks and then they have these valleys, and you don't want to depend on them as, being willing to always, like, for example, an easy example is the early days of Facebook. It was easy to stand out. They needed content. So any content you gave them, they showed it. And very quickly, it became a place where you now have to pay. If you want people to actually see what you create on Facebook, you really have to pay, if you want to have any impact at all. So I do think it's really important to have some kind of home base on the internet that you own. So rant over. That doesn't really tell you how to get started, but it gives you some parameters, I would say. Beyond that, I think the most important thing that you can do is just commit to writing. And sometimes it is easier to start on one of those platforms that it's like a stream where you write something and it moves down and it moves on, because it feels like a little bit less of a commitment, right? But the other thing you can do is if you decide, for example, to start a blog, or if you decide to do vlogging, let's say, and you're posting a video every week, you can just make a commitment to once a week posting a new piece of content, and just know that 80% of it will be kind of mediocre and 20% will be amazing and make your name on the internet. And that's okay. The only way to get to that 20% that makes your name on the internet is to do the other 80% also, because it's practice. You're honing your voice, you're honing your process, you're getting better at the language that you're learning to speak. And that's the purpose of it. So all of those people who want to write, they just need to start, and that Jeff Goins says that as well. You're a writer, start writing, that's how you become one. You just start doing it.
Exactly. I did an inventory of my articles. Half of my articles, or less than half of my articles on LinkedIn, are about writing. It's the first time I ever sat down and did that. I've never done that. I never bothered to list out what I've written
Analyze.
over the past 7 years. And I went all the way to the very beginning into the spring of 2014. And I actually had a little column. I set up a spreadsheet, and I marked down how many views I got for each article, engagements, you can call them likes, and comments. And I looked at those first few pieces. The numbers are black and white on my spreadsheet, were very, very small. And those numbers eventually grew. I got, with a mix of very good luck, but also persistence. So I actually was told the advice that I was given back in 2014 when I was starting to write on LinkedIn, and also I started my own blog, and the podcast came in 2015. This podcast, the advice I was given was, Glenn, he told me exactly what you told me, and I actually listened and I took his advice to heart. And he said, Glenn, you need to write something every week. Every week. And it doesn't matter how well, if you're sick or whatever, you're in bed, doesn't matter, just write something. And I actually took it very literally and seriously, and I did that consistently. And like I said, I can see the numbers on my spreadsheet.
And
Not
it
all
got easier too, right?
It did. And I
Yeah.
got into a rhythm and a routine, and it did get easier. And I did learn my own patterns, my own sort of a template for writing blog posts. It wasn't a formula. You could call it a formula if you really want to. I don't mind. Call it whatever you want. It worked. I also, like I said, I had a lot of good luck, but I also had the support of the editors at LinkedIn who appreciated my content, which was very, very helpful.
They
And I'm
probably appreciated the consistency as well.
Good point. I didn't even think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And they needed me too, to some extent. I mean, they don't need me anymore.
Totally.
They got loads of cash, and they're very successful. They don't need Glenn Leibowitz, but nonetheless, I continue to write on LinkedIn as one platform, but I'm also now on Substack. But I also have owned my own websites, and I completely 150% agree with you that you need to have your own home base, your own platform. And I know a lot of people, content marketing experts such as yourself, and many others have said the same thing. But I'll never forget, and I have to give him credit for this, but one person who mentioned this, you may know him, is Michael Hyatt.
Oh, sure.
So anyway, so before we wrap this up, Pamela, again, I would love to talk to you forever, for hours and hours, but I'm conscious of your time, and I know you've got a business to run. What would be the one or two pieces of parting advice? Really aim more. Let's get back to more book publishing and marketing. Is it worth it? Is it worth the investment of time, energy, and money to write a book? And how should people get started?
Well, it's interesting in light of everything we've talked about. I think if people are thinking that they want to write a book, but they haven't ever really written, one of the best things that they can do is to adopt a writing habit, whether it's writing really content rich posts on LinkedIn or writing posts on their own site. Committing to writing on a regular basis is the best thing you can do to just kind of gain experience and gain confidence. The interesting thing about the spreadsheet that you just talked about, that you saw you had no views at the beginning, is, when I teach people about content marketing, I always say it's sort of like we're backstage in a theater, right? Where the curtain is drawn and we're backstage and we're getting everything set up and we're getting our mics set up and the scenery and everything. And we're really nervous, because the show's about to start, and they finally pull open the curtains and there is no one in the audience. But what I always tell people is that is actually a blessing. No one is watching in the early days. So you can make all your mistakes. You can be awkward. You can have your weeks where you're not feeling it and your writing isn't the best. It's okay. I mean, that's the whole purpose. You get those out of your system when no one is watching. And then as you get better, more people start paying attention and you feel more confident. So if you can find a place to write on a regular basis, that is the best thing that you can do to prepare yourself for taking on a much larger project like a book. It's, it's kind of like, it would be kind of like getting into the running habit if you want to run a marathon. You just got to run a little bit every day. You can't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to run a marathon, and I've never run before, but I'm going to do it now. I'm very committed, so I'm going to run that marathon. Like, it takes a little bit more than just commitment, right? So I think getting into a writing habit is one of the best things you can do to prepare for that. And yes, it's worth it. You asked if it's worth it, and it's totally worth it. It feels like the project of a lifetime. But I know I love being able to say to people, I'm an author. My kids like being able to say, my mom's an author. I mean, even on that level, it's awesome. My husband, my wife's a two-time author. And, it sounds amazing to be able to say that you committed to a project at that level and you put your expertise into a package that could potentially help people for decades. It's pretty amazing compared to all the ephemeral pixels that we're all focused on, most of us nowadays. To have something actually in print feels really, really good. So it is totally worth it. It's a big commitment, but it's totally worth it.
Well, that was very poetically put, Pamela.
Awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking the time to take us into your studio, into your business, the Offer Accelerator program. Why don't you just tell us now, where should we find you? Tell us the exact URL, spell it all out.
Thank you. Yes. So my home base on the internet is bigbrandSystem.com, BIGBRANDSYSTEM, Big Brand System, singular. And my program is called the Offer Accelerator with Pamela Wilson, because who else is going to be with, right? So they can find that by going to theofferaccelerator.com, and that will send them to a page on Big Brand System where they can learn all about it. And that is a program, if people are interested in creating a consistent revenue generating online offer. It could be a service or a product or a combination. It's a program that has a full curriculum. It has my systems, my processes, my templates for marketing, and I provide weekly coaching and weekly project reviews. So there's a place that you can send in what you're working on, and I'll create like a custom video for you about how it's looking and maybe some guidance and some advice. There's also a private community that you're a part of. It's a 12-month program, so it's a big commitment, but there's enough time to kind of work through the whole thing for you to have time to promote your offer and get feedback on it and optimize it and all of that. So it's a really special program, and I love working with people in our age group. It's an honor.
That's great. Now, thank you so much. Best of luck with that program. It sounds very exciting. And again, thanks a lot, Pamela.
I'm so glad we had a chance to connect again. Thank you for inviting me.